Good Monday morning. Nice to be back, guys. We're here for video lecture number 4 as we continue through the civil rights. Some important announcements for today, Monday. Make sure you are taking your vocab part 2 quiz. If you haven't taken part 1, make sure you get that done. Hopefully you're done with your terms now on your reading questions and vocab sheet. And let's go ahead and get into the notes. We only have 4 for this section, and then we're going to have 4 for day 5 as well. So not a ton. So we're going to get through. We're going to take our time talking about a little bit different aspect to the civil rights movement. Some different people. We've talked about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And his nonviolent civil disobedience approach to the civil rights movement, and how effective that was with like the Montgomery bus boycott, with his works in Birmingham, his March on Washington. And I thought you guys did a really good job on the quick rights, describing that, discussing that, talking about how nonviolent action was really effective, and then showing the counter, showing what was happening by groups throughout the South against African Americans and other minority groups that were trying to help with the civil rights movement. I thought you guys did a fantastic job on the quick right. We're going to have another one of those tomorrow, so make sure you're ready for that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the notes. So get your notes out if you need to, and go ahead and flip to slide Malcolm X. All right. So Malcolm X advocates for black nationalism. So who is Malcolm X? Malcolm X was actually born Malcolm Little. All right. He drifted into crime as a teenager. Especially when he saw the oppression and what was happening in his neighborhoods. Crime kind of attracted him as a way to fight back against kind of the social injustices that he was incurring. While in prison, Malcolm Little is introduced to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad in the Nation of Islam. This is the Black Muslim movement in the United States during the 1960s. And Malcolm X, or Malcolm Little, is going to be a big part of this. He changed his name from Little to X, so went from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X, because he said Little was his slave name. And so he didn't want that connotation attached to his name of previous history of oppression of African Americans in the United States. And so now he's adopting this new last name, X, because for a lot of times, slaves, when they were told to write their name, obviously most of them didn't know how to spell. They were illiterate, so they would just make an X on the spot. So he changes his last name to X to kind of symbolize that last name that a lot of Africans in the United States that were slaves would use to insinuate what their last name was. He rejected the goals of the early civil rights leaders, such as that of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in the civil disobedience and the nonviolence. His approach is going to be a complete separation of the societies. He doesn't want integration. He's not fighting for Brown versus Board of Education. That's not important to him. What's important to him is, hey, we can't coexist. Let's separate. Let's have a portion of the United States just be for minorities and African Americans. Then let's have another portion of the United States that are just for whites. All right? Someone who would have been in support of this idea was that whole Back to Africa movement that we were talked about earlier this year in the 1920s. And so he doesn't want to fight for integration. That's a fight that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and a lot of civil rights activists, Thurgood Marshall, are trying to fight. They want integration. They want society to come together. Restaurants, busing, schooling. Malcolm X says, no, let's solve this by separating everything. So they're two very drastically different people in their approaches. Not saying that one is right over the other, but a lot of people tended to not agree with Malcolm X. A lot of people were also a little scared of the tactics of Malcolm X, because unlike Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he's going to take a much more brash, physical approach to creating that separation or creating that change. So, he rejected nonviolence as a strategy to bring about change. And then something happens with Malcolm X. He has like an epiphany, all right? Malcolm X then splits with the Nation of Islam. Why? Well, that's a good question. Because of his trip to Mecca. So, like any devout Muslim, one time in your life, you are supposed to make this trip to the Holy Land, to Mecca. And so when he goes to Mecca and he goes to the praying wall, he gets down and he starts praying, and he looks to his left and he looks to his right, and he notices there's people that don't look like him. There's white people. There's people of other ethnicities. And he realizes that his faith is all-encompassing. So with what he believes in, he is there with other people who are not like him. He's integrated. And so these teachings of the black Muslims, which we later come to find out is actually a kind of a terrorist organization in the United States, was to separate. Yet they're going against the doctrine of their religion, but they're using their religion as rhetoric, all right, to force this separation, even though that most people in the United States didn't want to separate, or most people of that faith didn't want to separate. So what ends up happening with Malcolm X? He converted to Orthodox Islam and began to reach out to people of all races and tried to integrate them. And so you kind of see this change of him going back to the ways of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he is trying this integration and trying to bring people together instead of separate people. And so it's that middle point of his life that's a big contentious area, and he had lost a lot of followers. And later in his life, when he's trying to convert back over and bring people back together, it's almost too late. He's kind of lost his luster. People aren't sure what to believe because he's already said one thing, now he's doing another. And a group that's going to be really upset is the Nation of Islam, because he was their leading activist, he was their top recruiter, and now he switched on them, and they can't allow this to happen. They got to do something, all right, to stop this. In 1965, 3 members of the Nation of Islam assassinated Malcolm X while he was speaking in New York City. So this is going to be our second civil rights activist, Malcolm X, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who are both assassinated. Now, Malcolm X is assassinated by people within his own organization, the Nation of Islam, which he split from. So other African Americans, because they're upset that he is going against their teachings, he's telling people how they are wrong. Where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by a racist, by James Earl Ray, who had an agenda of white nationalism. Okay, so 2 completely different assassinations, but 2 assassinations of 2 really key figures during this time period, during the civil rights time period. The next slide, you can see a picture there of Malcolm X, really known for those dark rimmed glasses that he wore. There's actually a movie, shockingly, that I've seen that is called Malcolm X. Jamie Foxx, if you guys know who that is, he actually plays Malcolm X in the movie. It goes in depth into his life, his childhood, through the years of him being in the Nation of Islam, all the way up to his conversion to Orthodox Islam, and then his assassination. He was almost like a demagogue. The way he spoke was a lot different. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Was passionate when he spoke, and he spoke like a preacher. The difference here is Malcolm X is going to try and incite the crowd, trying to play on their fears and their prejudice, and he is going to be loud and in charge, and he's going to be very confrontational with how he speaks. And so there's a little bit of difference there between him and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Another group that was pretty prominent during this time period, the Black Panthers. If we get a chance and get back to school and watch Forrest Gump, he ruins the Black Panther Party because he gets in a fight. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can see it, all right? It's a really kind of funny scene. Not funny in the sense of what's happening, but, he stands up and he's like, I'm sorry for ruining the Black Panthers Party, all right? But in this, okay, is an organization that's very militant. The Black Panthers are militant. What does that mean? They have a lot of military characteristics that go with them. Bobby Seeley and Huey Newton founded the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California, so it's more of a West Coast organization, but they will travel east, but they're pretty much centered on the West Coast. They developed a 10-point platform setting out their goals. First and last points dealt with self-determination, which means who's in charge of creating change? You, right? Self. So they're saying in all their points, we have to do it. We have to take back. We have to be the ones that change. All right? And how are they going to do that? Violence is one of the ways. So an eye for an eye and things like that. So if there's a riot, they're going to go and they're going to riot against someone. If there's social injustice and people are kind of holding them down, they're going to go and they're going to stop that physically. Other demands included better jobs and decent housing. The Black Panthers provided many services for African Americans in their communities, including free breakfast and medical clinics. And so they're winning over the community. People aren't going to be upset that they're going out and attacking police officers or that they're starting riots, because guess what? They're helping those around them. So they see them as good, not bad. The perception in the rest of the world is this militant group who's bad, but within their community, they're seen as really good people. They're people that are helping out. They're known for observing police mistreatment of African Americans and taking vengeance against that, standing up for those. The last one, Black pride and the growth of Afrocentricism. This is a new term that gets brought about in the 1960s, Afrocentricism. Black power meant taking pride in their African heritage, right? So incorporating some of their heritage into their regular culture, into their regular life. How'd they do this? Well, they have a focus on African history, African culture, and the achievement of the African people. College students push for African and African American studies classes. So if you go to a university today, you can take African American history, African history, because it's a study of cultural heritage that's important to people, and it helps them relate more to that topic because they feel more connected to it, all right? They began to dress in traditional African clothing. In 1966, a Black scholar invented the holiday, Afrocentric holiday called Kwanzaa. So Kwanzaa, which is celebrated around Christmas and Hanukkah in December, was an Afrocentric holiday that's specific to people of African descent, created in the United States in 1966 as a holiday that's specific for African Americans. All right. The TV show Roots was introduced and won many awards. Roots, during the month of February, which was Black History Month, Roots was on like every Sunday. I forget what channel it was, like Sundance Channel or something like that. And it's a mini series, so kind of like Band of Brothers or things like that, where there's multiple episodes. There's only one season of it, but it chronicles the life of a slave, Kunta Kinte, as he is taken from Africa, his transport into the United States, his movement into slavery, and then when he has kids, and it goes generationally. So it finally ends post-Civil War, all right, with the freedom in the 13th Amendment. So you see this long history, almost 100 years of history and transition of generation to generation of African Americans from Africa into the United States, from slavery, fighting for freedom, and the hardships they endured. And one of the iconic scenes out of this is when he tries to escape Kunta Kinte from his slave master, and he's given an Americanized name, Toby. And they put him on a pole, and they're whipping him. And the way that they're trying to break him is they want him to say his American name. So they keep hitting him like, what's your name, what's your name? And they want him to say Toby, but he won't say Toby because he doesn't want to give up his connection to his past and his African history. And this is like a scene that won them a lot of awards for the show. The next slide you can see right here, Time Magazine has Alex Haley, the creator of Roots, and that's Kunta Kinte in the slave shackles that you see on the cover of Time Magazine. And for not just African Americans, even white society, they're watching this for the first time and they're kind of taken back by it. They're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, because we're so far removed from slavery, over 100 years in the United States by this point, of what actually transpired. So it is an eye-opening mini-series documentary that many people enjoy. That's it for today. On Monday, make sure you guys continue working on your reading questions, your vocab, and get your quizzes done, all right? I hope you guys have a great Monday. Welcome to Phase 2 of the online learning, and I will see you guys back here for our last video lecture of the Civil Rights on Tuesday, all right? Have a great day. I'll see you guys.